Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the channel. And this, I think, is episode for our series that we've been doing lately. I think this is episode either 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So, people like watching it. I replay it multiple times on my YouTube channel, and they are also on Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble.
Mm.
So, I just wanted to inform the public, please click the link in the description of these videos, and that'll take you to John's website, and you can purchase his periodical, sign up for a reading. He has a lot to offer, so please click that link in the description of this video and go to his website. So, John, thank you for coming back to the channel. And a lot has happened since the last time we talked, which
The
was 2 weeks ago.
forthright the last 2 weeks is, especially in the last few days. Um, I mean, January had events at a pace that was like a whole year. February is doubling that. And I'm thinking that every month in this year of reckoning, 2024, is going to do that. There's a now quickening of history is starting to go warp speed, and many things to change. Of course, I'll start with dealing with the most immediate major shift in the war in Ukraine, something that I predicted would happen. I thought it would happen around New Year's, but it's just taken a little longer. But as I predicted, it would be sudden and quick when a war of attrition is. I have this description of if you ever watch two arm wrestlers, sometimes what happens, wars of attrition are like this. If each arm is a one's a defense line and the other is an offense line, one's going to hold and the other's trying to pull you over. Like a defense line, it'll you from the outside, you'll see these two guys like this, and you're except for a little shaking or something, it's like nothing happening. And you would be mistaken to think nothing's happening. A tremendous amount of stuff is happening. It's just like, um, I mean, it's something very dynamic, just like what happens where a lot of people are bored by tightrope walkers, and they don't. But if you ever tightroped, or if you were like me, being because I'm heavier than my partner in painting, I'm a good anchor, big broad-shouldered guy. So he'd be weighed up 40 feet in the air, and I'd be holding his 180 pounds, 85 pounds in my hands on the ladder. And the way I did it is whatever move he did, I countered it. And in such a way that it looked like I wasn't moving at all, but it was a major effort. It was constantly dynamic. In the same way, a tightrope, most people want to fall off the rope and be right or left or theist or atheist, or they want a binary make it, or I'm going to be a positive thinker, not ever imagining that how can I define what positivity is if I completely suppress negativity? And so the illusion is to fall off the rope, and then you're really somebody. You really matters. Like Bill Maher hates centrists, and yet Bill Maher doesn't have any idea what the ultimate centrist is in politics or in looking at the world with either this or that, or like a tightrope. You have to be completely in the present, very intensely there, but not tight, or you'll fall over. This tightness is a binary thing. I must be tight to be at ease, and it doesn't work that way. So, so when you're on the tightrope, you are constantly making adjustments. You are constantly in a flux of change to keep your balance. But the strange thing is that you, even as a painter up in a ladder like I've been, it can be an incredibly beautiful meditation to be a house painter way up high, where any moment a little wasp can literally kill you by like flying right at your face. And if you're not centered, you'll go, oh, and there you go, 40 feet down to the cement. So that quality of death being close as life is, the two meeting in a potentially dangerous situation that you just take the isness of, not your opinion of, oh, I'm afraid of it. Oh, I like it. But because that also makes you weighty. The reason, if you do the Sufi whirl, where you whirl to music, centered in your heart, you'll find that the moment you begin to think, you start bobbling like this. Your thoughts literally take you out of balance. So you just have to stay, just totally stay, just smooth like that, just staying, moving. And then you'll find like a wheel, if your heart becomes a wheel of heartfulness, your brain will calm down and you will not go out of balance. But it's also beautiful when you do start thinking, you can see how the mind takes you out of balance, out of a harmony of either falling this way or that. So, um, so living in the moment in this kind of a world that we're in, where everything's topsy-turvy, where everything wants you to fall off the rope, either one extreme or the other. The art of being the balancer, a tightrope crosser, moment to moment, is what more and more people all around the world need to cultivate, because the world is going into a whirlwind of history right now, which I've long predicted for the 2020s, long predicted for 2023, 2024 being the advent window of it. And so as more things change, as more things get confusing, they can actually be an alchemy for you to be more centered. And as more, and I've just been finishing the end of my bunch of articles that'll be out by this weekend. That is quite an unusual thing, because it literally, I finish all the stuff I've been looking, I say all the stuff I've been looking about the world and all of its politics and its division and all of that is going on, its possibilities from these things. I suddenly dropped in my head that I should do a final essay on what a lot of people think, that there's a reason for everything. That nothing happens without a reason for it. And it's a beautiful thought, but it can go much deeper than that. Because the simple childlike wisdom says, but how would you know that there's reason for everything unless you did not have the context of irreason, of irrationality? Aren't they intertwined? Are they this side of the rope or that you can fall into? What then balances them is neither this nor that, as the Zen masters will say. And so living in Zen, which comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, which actually is the prefix of my name that Osho gave me when I became a disciple. My name is Swami Dhyan Arjuna. And so dhyana is dhyan. Dhyana is not meditation. That English word does not work. Dhyan is witnessing, neither for nor against. Dhyan is like being a mirror that reflects the world perfectly. It can only do that if it has no judgments of what it reflects, but is completely and wholly aware of what is being reflected. And that creates an understanding for what is being reflected. And that sets a non-motion, a non-course to simply stopping a connection that makes things linger with us, ego, separation, desires. And that's when suddenly you're right on the tightrope, this moment of eternity. And that's when you begin to discover that the seeking of enlightenment, of God, of all these different names for it, there's a quality that we're taught, which we're not even aware of, and must become aware of it through being a tightroper, seeing the opposites, but not being of them, is that enlightenment may very well be so ordinary, so completely ordinary, That's why we miss it, because we've been deeply trained to be seeking extra the ordinary, not the ordinary. We're trying to find God. We're trying to find salvation. We're trying to find our Buddhahood. You can't find, and this is the hypothesis to take on this tightrope journey, you can't find something that you are. Now, don't believe that or disbelieve that, and then you're back in the trap of either or, this and that. That will push you this way off the rope or that way, and you'll have to climb back on the rope again and start all over again in the next eternal moment. There is, so the Zen people, who Zen is actually an evolution. We've spoken of it before, of Dhyana becoming, with Buddha, when he spoke Pali, not Sanskrit, was jhana, and witnessing. And then when it went with Bodhidharma to China, it became Chuan, got Chinese a little. And then when it went to Japan, it became Zen. So Zen is beyond what Buddha taught. There's no such thing as Zen Buddhism. That is a misnomer. Uh, Zen is the evolution beyond Buddhism and Buddha's teaching. And if he were alive, he would say so, because he very much predicted that that's what he hoped would happen. In the 25 centuries of the wheel of Dharma being spun again by a great master like himself, he foresaw the Maitreya, the friend, who would be there would be the end of the master disciple orthodoxy with this. There's always a subtle feeling with masters and disciples of the master superior to you. Now, my master, I believe, was that fulfillment of that, because he really was like our friend, just another ordinary human being. And whatever the mastery is a context for every other human being. If you meet somebody like Osho, a being like that, he always would say, "I am just an ordinary man," and we don't know, you're extraordinary. I mean, you've got a little light around you, and you're extraordinary. But that's ordinariness. Ordinariness is extraordinary because it is what you are. It's like the very source of you. So before we plunge in all the craziness in the world, I'm not, I didn't plan this. This is just all happening. This is how it is with me. So I never imagined I'd be talking about tightropes, but it is just here to is that we have to walk the line, like the country music song. Walk the line. We gotta walk the line, but it's not a doing. It's motivated and propelled by inner standing within yourself, not outside, the outside shape of your personality and all of that. And this formula, I contend, if enough people start to live this way, everything, all the horrors and oddnesses that I'm going to talk about in the next few hours, just keep the thread of this, that if you're the tightrope witnesses of it, you are actually not only finding your own oasis of awareness that you've never lost, you've just been trained to look away from it, to seek it. You can't seek what you are. And you come born the Buddha, the Christ consciousness. You can't seek it. You're the Emmanuel come. But you can be taught to look away from where it is. And that's what is the fundamental problem that is creating an energy in the world where the human race, and this has been going on for, especially since the late 80s, when we cleared 5 billion people. I think it created when the population went beyond that threshold, it created a crisis where I call it the mind plague, where if people live unconsciously throwing their thoughts and their dream nightmares and all that into the not the ecosphere, but in psychic, the psychosphere. That's a layer of a more subtle atmosphere that surrounds a living world. it creates the symptoms of this plague is all around us now that I mean, I'll just use something rather blunt to when people even thought that Ronald Reagan might be too old to be president. He up to the time in his second term, he had a little problems, but he basically there was this famous thing where he's being hit for the person that he was debating for the second term election, and I can't think of his name at the moment. He tried twice to unseat Reagan, but Reagan said this, and I was never a fan of Reagan. His people destroyed my commune and got my master poisoned and all that. So, but I don't hold a grudge. Such is the case. But I can, because of that, I can admire the good times, things that Reagan did, like when he kind of said, "Well, my esteemed opponent here, I'd like to thank him very much for what he just said about aging, because I just want to say that um, I have no problem with this young and inexperienced man becoming president," or something like that. He turned it around. Everybody laughed. Even Walter Mondale laughed. It was wonderful, and so that was before we had 5 billion people. Now we're approached with a similar problem with the current president, who not only was severely demented before he became president, but I had been since 2018 on national shows and all, and saying, please, folks, don't pick this man. He's got dementia, and you do not want to create a situation in your country where you have an empty shell surrounded by wolves, because you're not voting for the wolves, you're voting for him. But if you vote for him, the people that will be chosen by the deep state to use him as an empty shell, a front, they're going to, they're going to be running the show, and they will not acknowledge and respect you. They will take your country in directions that show they have no compassion for you or connection to you, the people, which this democracy is about, and therefore it may threaten its utter destruction. Off the rope we go. So they will not acknowledge and respect you. They will take your country in directions that show they have no compassion for you or connection to you, the people, which this democracy is about, and therefore it may threaten its utter destruction. Off the rope we go. So we now have this crisis that people voting unconsciously. On top of that, the vote was very suspicious. I am collecting in this new set of articles all kinds of videos and things showing exactly some rather questionable stuff that was going on in the 2020 election, a lot of it. And because it didn't pass muster in the courts that it was prosecuted in, because they were part of one party that stood to profit the most from everything being a mess, these judges, which were picked by opposition parties of the Republicans, were, they had the power to go, okay, fine, we don't agree with you. The court doesn't have to explain itself. It says, no, I don't think you have a trial here. When they're really saying, I have the power to say that, even though whether you have a trial or not, of a case here or not. And there was a lot of that going on, but time has gone on. The recordings and the evidence is finally getting seen. And this is one of the more amazing things about this mask off year, where the mask is coming off of a lot of things and they can't put it back on. Now it's up to all of us to notice the change and then remember our part in this, because everybody's responsible for this mess. They're responsible, so are we. And it's okay to confront yourself and say, I screwed up. I am a citizen of this country. I don't know my constitutional rights. You know, people are going to have to now start reading the Constitution. They're going to have to get political. We've had this idea of politics being so ugly and terrible because we are making it that way. Ours is a passive way. By not watching these people that we vote into office, we have created this problem because of our passivity. Their directivity has been to um, take over our country. And fortunately for other countries like Russia and China, a lot of people around the world, they see it happening and we don't see it yet. They're saying, you know, America used to be a great place, and the American people, we still love them, but they seem to have been taken away by some cabal of elites, a plutocracy in that use the Constitution in name only and democracy in name only when they are literally losing their democracy. They're enabling mass genocide in Israel. They are in Palestine. And what a topsy-turvy world when the Yemeni Nasrallah people, who are also suffering a genocide from American armed and directed and advised by advising the Saudi Arabian army, the UAE army, and I think a few others in alliance. When the Yemeni war was going on in 2015 till a few years ago, it was a mass genocide effect. They were trying to bomb and destroy the Yemenis in a similar way. So the Yemenis have done something also that hasn't been done since World War II. They are such people of honor in their tough little rock on the corner of the world that they declared war on Israel and would stop blocking their ships because you know, what can they do to pressure Israel to stop killing millions of Palestinians? Well, so they were realists. They said, we're not going to do something impossible. We've got this narrow strait through the Red Sea, and what we can do is seize ships that are owned by Israel and say, we'll keep doing this until you cause a truce and stop killing Palestinians, because it's immoral what you're doing. Now, what does the West, and especially America, do responding to it? It has this operation, you know, this corporate sounding operation for war with Yemen. They start attacking Yemen for trying to stop the second Holocaust of Semites. This time it's Semite on Semite rather than Aryans, master race on Jews. But it's the way karma keeps echoing itself in reverse image. And so the Yemenis are moral. What they're doing is morally right. They made a stake a claim by officially declaring war, something this country hasn't done since World War II in 1941. I mean, the police action was a UN thing that we got involved with. That's when we started tricking ourselves. That's when we didn't make it legally consequential. You know, if you go to war without declaring it, it's immoral because you're now not taking the responsibility of the consequences. You're playing as you go, changing the goals of your war. You're in a state of manipulating, and this is where, I mean, this is where it's all gone. And yet at the same time, without a war being declared, America is going after critics of its war, like many of us in the alternative media. But actually, they don't have a legal standing for that. You cannot be called a treasonous person if there is no war declared. You know, it has to be declared by Congress and not by a president's edict. And so so that is one of the fundamental issues to look at. And the other thing too is that, so in this year, we'll talk a little bit about the craziness that's going on here. This craziness is a symptom of an evolutionary jump. This kind of mind plague that's reaching a peak is really like the buildup of energy before a great travail of birthing something. Now, The future is in the birth channel. Will it cause something to happen where the birth kills the new future? Like a baby, sometimes things go wrong, a breech birth or something like that, that puts the mother in jeopardy. Or, does the egg start to grow inside the fallopian tube and not get into the womb? So using these metaphors, we're kind of in that place right now where those dangers, which are necessarily attracted on the tightrope walker's view, because they give energy to the change. If enough people get engaged and see themselves as a part of everything that's going on. So the so here we have a whole new chapter of in the genocide that's going on with Israel. Before, the one thing that I'm going to write a lot about in these articles I have is to really make people aware of how the mechanics of this genocide is being protected. And I would say this, that there's long-held Zionist passion to eradicate the Palestinians or the Arabs out of Greater Israel. It's the thing long suppressed. This demon is out in the air now. And it's oddly enough triggered by what happened October 7th, which Netanyahu seized upon and then declared Samuel's genocide against the Amalekites from the first book of Samuel. Um, and literally, if you read it, it's he means it. And a lot of people over time in Israel, the demographics war has been going on in Israel, a much more as like this demographic war that's going with our southern border being inundated by the Goths, masses of people, undocumented, is an attempt to create through demographics a one-party rule in the United States, the Democrats. That's how they think, although I wouldn't be surprised, since a lot of people from South America who've lived here a lot, uh, their demographic is tending slowly to go over to the Republicans. Um, I remember one time in one year I went to the caucuses of both parties, because I was kind of interested in one person and I was kind of interested in another, like Ron Paul, and for the other side, and I was looking at Dennis Kucinich on that side. And I remember that in the Republican caucus, there was a one Mexican American man who stood up and he said, we shouldn't be so sweepingly judgmental about a lot of people that are coming over the border that are Latino culture, because actually a lot of our values are theirs. And this was before Trump made that so. A lot of our values of home, family, church, things like that, that we wish to conserve are ours here. And it was funny. So half the people were silent, letting it in. The other were kind of being racist rednecks, going, nah, 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 nah. So let the wetbacks go home. And so, but I was seeking him out. I couldn't find him in the crowd, but I mean, it was later, but it was very, it was, he was right. And so there is a nasty surprise for this demographics that are going on, is that if a lot of these people stay over time, they may vote not for the Democrats of this kind of Democrat party. I mean, any party that would use demographics to commit war against another party is just not democratic. It's criminal, actually. It's treasonous, actually. Um, the to steal ballots, to not make an election clean. Um, any American who challenges an election should not be suppressed. I mean, if anything, that's the greatest proof that this has really been a conspiracy to change the demographics. Because why then, if somebody, when it first started, if you just said anything about it, you were shut down on the internet, you were silenced. People who are honestly doing things are not the people who shut you down when you say, hey, I think that there was some fraud in that election. A person of truth will go, you know what? Well, let's recount. Let's recount all the states. Let's look at all the ballots. Because we all sides need a system that works. Unless you're trying to take over the system in an undemocratic way, then you're all for obscurity, banning, suppressing. So I look at that in my innocent self and I say, it's just like how many, nobody can answer me this question. Why did more people vote than are registered by the tens of millions? Nobody can answer that question because it was a crime. And the people who profited from it don't want to face that, whether they're conscious of it or not. And so, the only way the system works is if everybody that's part of this democracy wants to make sure that our functions of voting work. And if there's any doubt about voting, we should be happy to recount every election until it's clear that the system works. Now, I'll tell you something about the Russian democracy that we used to have, and since we've dropped it, we're in this mess we're in. The Russian democracy, it's all paper ballots. They all have to be identified and registered. There are cameras in every polling booth across the 11 time zones of Russia. It was a big news in Russia a few years back when they actually caught something hardly ever seen before. Some lady was stuffing ballots, but she did it on camera, and it was if she was immediately arrested, those ballots were checked, and that was corrected. We've had armies of people doing that in America, and it's not only is it not being, the evidence is not being respected, but it's almost like the system is going, don't move on, nothing to see here. If you keep this up, we're going to do something to put you in jail. I will tell you that Russia is far more ahead in the hard road of democracy as we are losing it. And you will not know that if you only watch your mainstream news propagating all kinds of illusions about what Russia is. And if you read me, you will find that I am a network of all my sources. They become your sources. I give you, through the links that I have to things, they will give you other links and other links. And you will then, I don't want you to believe what I'm saying. I want you to research it and test what I'm saying and see if you resonate with it. And the only way that can happen is if you just stop thinking binary, this is good, this is bad, man with long beard is evil, man with long beard is good. And just check it out. That's the American way. You gotta test the tires. And that's the only way of more and more of us become more active in that we can fix our broken system before it becomes a complete plutocracy dictatorship. And so these are the times where we're in, because it's a consequence of us actually taking for granted our freedoms. And it's not a new story. It's a repeat of an old story. Um, so, so what's happening? So a lot of things that are going on in the world, for instance, what's happened in the last few days is very, very significant in both places. The fact that Netanyahu during the Super Bowl was massacring a lot of Palestinians and basically pointed out, and I have the paper, his order that he's going to do it. I have it in these articles in English. He's going to create this, he's got to remove the people from Rafah, which is on the border with Egypt. There's a buffer zone where the Egyptians now on their side of the buffer zone are building a huge 16-foot wall with razor wire in rows on this kind of black surface. I guess it's black because it'll be harder to climb up on it because it's so hot there and the sun radiation and stuff. So it's this huge wall and they're building it. I've watched pictures of them building it in space. And it's there to trap whoever Palestinians who are not killed in all the blowing of things up that's about to happen end up the 1.4 million of the 2.4 million Palestinians, all 1.4 are in Rafah. And the whole idea of this is to drive the Palestinians violently out of Gaza Strip into the desert between what's called ironically, the Philadelphia zone corridor. Philos, love. I can't remember in the moment what Delphia means. I mean, I think of Delphic, but but I don't know. Do you remember, Paul,
No,
what the
no.
Greek for Philadelphia is? Anyway, I will check that out and define it in my articles before I publish them. But it's about philos, love, philotas, philos. Um, so so that's going on. And I have to say it, I hate to say it, but I think that the Zionists will get the weapons they need. In fact, they just got another big shipment of 1,000 bombs from America. They will get the weapons they need. The As long as Biden is there, he'll give lip service to calling Netanyahu names and saying, don't do this, or this is bad, or talking about sanctioning Ben Gvir, who is the even more extreme right wing and crazy than Netanyahu is, if Netanyahu, he's told me, he says it out publicly, if Netanyahu does not continue this genocide, we will kick him out of office like that. And so we got some really fanatic people in power in Israel. They are not synonymous with the Judaism or the Jewish people. Zionism is an aberration, in my view, of that, just like Nazism was an aberration of Germans. And it is, so I think that there's the big key for this, for Americans to change this, is to understand who really runs the United States of America. And it's a lobby of Israeli Americans, which also means that since so many Israelis have dual citizenship, it is AIPAC, AIPAC. AIPAC is a lobby group that has not been asked to register as a foreign agent. Whereas you can get put in prison if you do what they're doing, if you're any other lobbyist who is, working to do things that favor Israel with Americans that have dual citizenship. And by the way, the extent to which dual citizenship has been rife in every administration since the turn of the century. George W. Bush was the who's who of neoconservatives in his cabinet. He had them all in there, and half of them were Jewish and had dual citizenship with Israel. In fact, when they were not doing security think tank things for the United States, they were over in Jerusalem doing it for the Israelis. And I remember Scott Ritter, another great source of mine, he put out this point. He said, you can't serve two masters. You can't serve two loves of country, especially in power. I mean, if anything, the amendment that I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the 10th Amendment, but I may be wrong. That means that if you're not a native born United States citizen, you can't become president of the United States, because the concern of the founding fathers was that you might, if you serve two states, you might serve one to the detriment of America, your other. And so the best way they could figure that out, it's not a perfect idea, but it's just to not have somebody who grew up in another country pledging their allegiance to that country becoming also later in life president of the United States. That's why Arnold Schwarzenegger could never run for president. So, because he's Austrian. So now we have a whole lobby group that is essentially serving one state in ours. And the way they control the situation, hundreds of millions of dollars they funnel out into our elections. Um, and what they do is they kind of exploit the pro-Israel feeling that we have in America. A lot of it is also based on the fact that the America is a Christian country, and in the Christian faith, there's also a lot of evangelical people who believe in their own projection of what Book of Revelation is about. Is the Jews play a very important part in the return of Christ. Of course, all the Jews understand the catch 22 of that. Even Netanyahu plays with it, all the ministers, and keeps that going to get their influence, to have influence over them. But their idea is that well, the Jews then, when Jesus comes, they all have to convert to Christianity, and if they don't, they're going to hell. So it's a pretty twisted thing, and of course a lot of Jews will say, well, okay, because they're great survivors. I know I'm half Jewish. You go, okay. Oh well, we know the Emmanuel's coming later. So, we have to deal with these people now, and we'll just play with their situation because, I understand why Israel is a very small country and it's surrounded by a lot of enemies that basically it's pretty much responsible for making, although it's not taking responsibility for that, um, because it believes they're the chosen people, and if they rob a land and its people of its territories and wealth and take it as their own, it's okay because they're not goys. They're not sub-Jewish, not and it is just like subhuman in other fascist points of view that can happen not just in Germany, it can happen anywhere. It can happen here. Um, and they happen in Israel very badly right now. So the So, except for one bit of good news, I must balance it out. The Supreme Court, which Netanyahu in the last few years in his different terms of office has been trying to change the basic rules. So the Jewish state is redefined and he tried to get that through where the interpretation of the Jewish state was redefined. And the way I wrote about it, it was like the way he defined it was the perfect definition out of Mein Kampf of what a National Socialist state is. It is whether it's German or Jewish, is a state where, for the culture and the race of Germans or of Jews, it's a nation of Germans, a nation of Jews, giving them premier citizenship over anyone living there who is not a German Aryan, not a Jewish chosen person. And so it always leads to disaster, and it may very well, like anyone who embraces this kind of ideology in history, it tends to quickly, utterly destroy their country and their culture. The Nazis took one of the most sophisticated cultures in Europe and nearly destroyed it in 13 years, with the last 6 being World War II. Turned it into a lunar landscape. Nazism has not gained power in the world since then until in Ukraine in 2014. The Banderite Nazi movement, which is overtaken with U.S. help, and ironically, Victoria Nuland, Kagan, a lot of the dual citizen neocons who are also Jewish. So the whole kind of idea of it's a strange thing that we get attracted to the things that nearly destroy us. Like a lot of Zionists are openly talking about what Hitler did right, and they're using that against the Palestinians. I mean, we looked at the quotes of that before. So the good news is a whole lot of Jewish people all over the world are demonstrating against it. This is this is this is good. Uh, a lot of things. What's happening with us in America? I think we can look to Europe as a sign of what we may be doing 6 months from now. Case in point. Um, I have a whole lot of videotape of links in my articles about what is happening with the farmers across all of Europe. It's parts in the EU, part not. And it is a significant awakening because, frankly, because of the Nord Stream pipelines being blown up by the United States last year. I think it was last year. Maybe no, it was 2000. No, it was 22. It was 2 years ago. And that's deindustrializing Europe. The Americans did this because they want to keep Europeans as vassals. And they're also looking at seeing some of that deindustrialization moving to America to make its home here. Although a lot of it's going to China, it's going against their plan because they're getting better deals in China. But in the sum total of it, Germany is deindustrializing now. It's dropped from being the fifth largest economy in the world. Russia now is the fifth largest economy. Germany has dropped maybe below 6 or 7. It's not clear where it is. Germany is the economic heart of the European Union. Without Germany thriving, the European Union is like a body with a sick heart. And the sickness will pass through all the veins and arteries to all the other adjunct organs and nations of Europe. And it's happening fast. And it's happening so fast. And then add to that this strange group of people in Switzerland, the globalists, the Davos people, the Klaus Schwabes, Klaus Schwab's people, is kind of another resurfacing of the German world domination cult, because Klaus Schwab, though he lives in Switzerland, is from South Germany. And he lives there. But he's got his Berchtesgaden up there in the snowy Alpine, Swiss Alpines, just like Hitler had his in the German Alpines. And there's a lot of parallels to it. And this whole idea of dominating the world. It is going to decline. It reached its peak in the last few years because of things like thousands of tractors suddenly starting to line up. Just after January began, they started to line up in thousands to converge on Berlin in Germany and block all the roads and shut the city down to make their point that we cannot live without farmers. Now, I've come from an ancient farming family. Well, we're not fighting people, but in wars. And the I've worked a lot in farms in this life too. When I was in the Oregon commune, and it kind of got me back to my genetic roots as a Hogue, as a man from from the Bocage, from the French Norman. My family was living for centuries in French Normandy, and a lot of great farms there. There's something sacred about growing things, growing livestock, growing plants. I mean, I love this little village I live in on Whidbey Island because it's got a lot of farms around it. And in fact, I can go up to 6th Street where the dairy farms are or where the sheep farms are, and I can just smell all that wonderful grass and manure. It's like, yeah, this is down to earth. This is sacred. I can understand why the ancients looked at growing weed and the Egyptians and making it a sacred thing, because it is. It's life. You have people in the Schwab world that think, for ulterior motives, that because they say, well, because of all the carbon that is created by farming and livestock and all, that farms around the world will have to cut 1/3 of their work. Well, you will end farming if you do that, because farming is a tough business and there's not a lot of wealth in it. It's a calling for a lot of people. And so what they were doing, the graduates of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, who are now insinuating themselves in elections, kind of the version that AIPAC is doing in the United States, for insinuating people who take the money to be pro-Israel. And if they don't, the AIPAC comes calling and say, hey, Senator, if you don't support Israel like you have been, and thank you very much for that, If you decide not to support Israel and us, we will primary you. And what that means is that they will find if you're a Republican, they'll find a Republican that can beat you. Or if you're a Democrat that will go with them, take the money, be part of the grift, and they'll give them lots of money to defeat you. So what can happen is you will not be in the final election when your term is up. Some younger guy who will take the money that you are not taking anymore will replace you before you even get to the national election. That's how they have taken over the House and the Senate and the executive branch. Our country has been taken by a foreign power, a very small foreign power who knows how to manipulate a very naive and dumb but wonderful nation. You know, my big bodyguard, little Israel goes, go over there and occupy Syria because we want to keep Syria down. We don't want them to take their oil because they need that to rebuild their ruined cities. So if we keep them ruined, that's why the Americans are guarding the oil. And guess where they're pumping that Syrian oil and where it goes to? It goes to Israel. As that's a little game of you do this for us, we do this for you. And then the next thing is that the enemy before that was of course the Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein had the audacity of kind of being a power in the Arab world, which means it threatened Israel. Now they even started building nuclear weapons. They were very close to creating nuclear weapons before the Operation Desert Storm and the Persian Gulf War in 1992, 91 happened in early 1991. The reason why he's building them is that Israel already had them since the 60s. So, Israel had already destabilized the Middle East by being the only secret nuclear rogue power, not declaring their nukes. And they're doing that even today. So it has given them an umbrella. Now, where a lot of people, even North Korea, became a nuclear power when the Soviet Union collapsed and they lost their Soviet umbrella. They started in 1994 to create nuclear bombs because they realized the reality is if you have them, people think twice before they attack you or exploit you. So that's the street rules of the world, folks. And so because of that, the Kim dynasty has survived because they have them. Now, Israel has kind of played that game as a proactive thing rather than just a potential, just leave us alone, let us do our thing, and we'll leave you alone. But if you start kind of encroaching upon us, remember, we got nukes now. But what Israel has done has actually made their nuclear, the Voldemort name that shall be never mentioned in public, that they are a rogue nuclear power with maybe 200 nukes of all kinds, suitcases up to thermonuclear. And they use that as a shield to have America invade this person, or they can go and brazenly bomb Syria whenever they like, or Lebanon, or do this because what are you going to do? We're the nuclear power here, and all you Arabs don't and Persians don't have that. So that's what scared them so much about Iran, because Iran at one point was looking at the possibility, not to actually make one, but to be able to, just like Japan has done, just like Korea has done, just like all the legal nuclear powers that have private civilian nuclear power, they all, if they wanted to, could create bombs. But they don't have to. The fact that Iran actually dropped it in 2004, which is true, they dropped trying to make it, but they still are now in a condition now where they they are producing a lot of uranium, and it can be used for the new nuclear reactors that they're going to build, and they're building several. But it also could be in realpolitik, a way of saying, let's just not say what we're going to do. Let's keep it kind of our lips sealed. I mean, if the Ayatollah, Supreme Ayatollah Khamenei is consistently saying, and I think he means it, he's declared that nuclear bombs are un-Islamic, that they're anti-life, and he is not interested in making them. But in politics, someday he may leave this mortal coil. He's very old, and who knows who will replace him? Might find a way to say yes, maybe out of necessity because of Israel's threat. If Iran has nukes, Israel cannot use nukes on Iran. It neutralizes the danger in a regional, mutually assured destruction that we had in the first Cold War that I grew up in. We're in the second Cold War now, since Nazis took over Ukraine in 2014 and set in motion this whole thing that's led to the NATO proxy war with Russia, which they're losing, which is a little dangerous because America has gotten so inured to not losing, even though it's lost almost every war. But if NATO loses in this, which it will, I predict, it is losing. The Ukrainian army is on the verge of breaking. There's already talks of mutiny. The Azov battalion that got ordered in by the new commander of the Ukrainian forces, Syrskyi. Syrskyi's been chosen as the commander because he follows exactly what President Zelensky wants, which is, Zelensky's no political scientist or experience in leadership. He's an actor who can play a piano without his hands. Quite funny, and actually how he does it. But he is, he played in a movie, in a series in Ukraine, which was highly successful and actually pretty well made. I've seen some of it. It's Servant of the People in Ukrainian, and it was where some guy became the president of Ukraine. And it had all the jokes about what goes on in Ukraine and all. It was a huge success. And Kolomoisky, one of a Jewish and very influential oligarch, which of the team of oligarchs that run Ukraine, they're the real power. He decided, I don't think it was very wise of him, but he decided to make the actor playing the president actually become the president. And that's kind of a converse way of bringing somebody in who has no mind into the American power, and then bringing somebody who has no experience, who then is more malleable to do. Or what they can be is that Zelensky actually sometimes thinks he really is the president, and his policy of not one foot back, we don't lose any Ukrainian territory, is exactly the same insane policy that Adolf Hitler used. That's why it's Nazis there. Adolf Hitler used that when he was losing the war after Stalingrad. He used it once when they were first checked before Moscow, when the Russians were almost defeated in the first year. And he said, not one step back, and it actually worked because the Soviets exhausted themselves, throwing themselves at the Germans, who did stand their ground. They lost 200 miles of territory. They were almost in Moscow when they were pushed back by 100 Siberian divisions, but Stalin just tried to win the war and exhausted all those divisions. Made that war, that battle of Moscow, in the history of the world, was the largest battle ever waged in any war. It had 2.5 million combatants. It was stretched on a front of 600 miles. Because the losses were so high on the Russian side, it's become kind of what I call the greatest battle never told, like the greatest story never told or ever told. It's never told because, but everybody talks about Stalingrad and Kursk and all these, but really the tide turned in before Moscow. Even Hitler knew that. He's walking around the snow outside of his Wolfschanze base on the Eastern Front, muttering, said, "I fear we've lost this war." Because the damage, the German 3.5 million army lost 1,200,000 casualties, and half of that was in that battle. And it made forever the Germans unable to resume on all their three fronts. Army Group North, Center, and South could not keep the whole vast 1,000-mile front going because they lost too many men. So that's why in 42, he only used Army Group South to go to the oil fields and Stalingrad because he couldn't. He didn't have enough men. They had to hold their line because he lost so many men. So, strategically, the war was over for him. It was just a matter of how long he could keep this going. But by not winning that ultimate gamble and going all the way to the Urals, Hitler lost the war. But people wouldn't really recognize that for a couple more years. Just like Japan lost the war when the Battle of Midway destroyed the four fleet key carriers and killed off most of their best pilots, which they couldn't replace. Then suddenly Japan had lost its air superiority edge, and it could continue to take more islands. But by 1943, a dozen Essex-class carriers were being built in the United States with trained pilots, and the Japanese industry was not able to do the same. So it was done. It was all for the time and the suffering and the shouting. Ukraine lost this war before they even started it. NATO lost this war before they even started it. That's the thing I was saying long ago. I said, it's Sun Tzu time, everybody, the ancient Chinese philosopher who said, if you move, a really good commander knows his enemy enough and can maneuver his enemy into a situation where he's lost the final battle before it even begins. Napoleon used to do that a lot too, with his new concept of armies, of an army not being this one big, huge mass that's eating everything in sight as it's marching through a country, but to break it up in mini armies called corps. I mean, the whole corps system in armies is Napoleon's concept, is genius, where you make these 25 to 27,000 man armies, which have their own infantry, cavalry, artillery, and logistical support. And you spread them out to find out where that big lumbering enemy army is. And when one finds it, horsemen go to the other corps and they all start converging on that army. And because they are smaller units, they can travel longer and not oppress the people by taking too much food, unlike the other army. And that's why Napoleon, by pure maneuver, won most of his battles. Ironically, he never he never he actually was always on the defense, even though because his armies were faster and all, he would catch the offensive armies going after France. The crown heads of Europe were trying to take this upstart out. So all 8 coalitions, I think 8 or 9, but all 8 of the ones when he was emperor, not Waterloo, he was defending himself and winning by a mobile defense. Morally speaking, he was defending his country when he was defeating all these people doing that, except one time, and that was a very immoral move. His invasion of Russia was a war of choice, not of, you know, necessity to win. And he was utterly destroyed in Russia, and within 3 years, he was out of here and exiled in St. Helena. So anyway, the farmers are a sign that, Pluto, and now we're going to get a little political astrological here, that Pluto is since October 10th to October of last year, 10th of last year, to October 10th of this year, a 366 day, because we have a leap year, a 366 day astrological hidden Pluto. I call it the hidden astrological year of Pluto, Lord of the Underworld. Bringing up what is underneath for everyone to see and transcend. And it's the last exact pass over its natal birth position, which 248 years ago gave birth to the United States in one single orbit, which that orbit is ending in this year. So this country, by July 4th, will be 248 years old. And it's now, so that's an end of an era of America, and it's also the travail through that end of that era, the hegemonic era of the last 36 years of this 248 cycle year in normal years, is going to lead to a great changes in America, the end of the hegemonic power, hopefully a return of America coming back to their values, back to their constitutional laws, being a republic of laws, not a republic of special interests. And the thing that's going to help that astrologically in the cosmic forces of this is that Pluto now, in this year, I think it started in January and it'll end in September, is taking a 2-degree dip of its toe into the next 20-year transit that it's going to be involved, which is all about revolutionary and humanitarian change. And that is Pluto's transit through the sign of Aquarius. Now, so this year, a lot of my articles are talking about this is a glimpse or the testing of the waters of this period between January and September 22nd, I believe, that that we're going to get a glimpse of all the revolutionary changes and potentials that are coming when Pluto at the end of this year, only 16 days, I believe, after the election, will move permanently for the next 20 years into Aquarius at the end of the third week of November of this year. And then it will remain there until January of 2022. I've often called this generational plutonic cycle, given that it's in the sign of humanitarians, new ideas, revolutionary ideas. It's a generation of the last chance generation, I call it, that we have to, in these next 20 years, do things, understand things that are overtaking us and start to work to construct something better. It's a time when farmers have to literally get the point. And this is what's great about what happened in Europe, because it hit everywhere. All the farmers of Europe rose up against all their governments. It started in Germany, it went to France. It really took off in France. It started in the Netherlands too, and then it went to Belgium, and it went into Eastern Europe, and now it's Poland is getting involved. It's like this whole, and by the spring, it could even be bigger, because we are astrologically in another important planet. Is Neptune's in Pisces. Neptune, when it gets into Pisces, it stays in the sign. It takes 164 years for it to transit from the zodiac all the way back around to its home planet in Pisces, which rules the 12th house, the finishing of great cycles, where hidden enemies are revealed and transcended. Also in Pisces, Pisces is about a collective mass message, when the existence is actually influencing masses of people to come together and question the status quo. So the last time Pisces was transited before this time, because we've been in it since 2011, and we'll be in it for another couple years till we reach that mark where it will go out into Aries. But in around 2026, I believe, around 2025, 2026. It entered in our current time, it came back for a little dip into Pisces, a taste, which is important because that parallels things that are happening with Pluto. It's like you get a taste of something, and in that taste, it's pretty big. What happened was that one vendor was getting corrupted, by governments in Tunisia this way and that, and he was so frustrated. It's just one mensch, one guy, just a regular guy, one of millions of just shop vendors who was young man who was he was just being given no way out to thrive. So what he did is he took his last can of petrol to heat his heaters when the cold Tunisian winters stood before the government building where all these legalese people were just ruining his life, doused himself with gasoline, and set himself on fire. And he survived the fire, but he died later. But it got the news about this one guy, just one simple guy, not somebody famous or influential, just one guy getting screwed by his government. So their minion. But it took off. This is a Piscean kind of phenomenon when Neptune comes back into its home planet, because Neptune is the god of oceans and earthquakes. So shaking things up on a collective level. So that one Tunisian vendor, the whole Arab world started talking about it. It went like wildfire. This is kind of that oceanic spread of a storm, of people with a collective feeling, all sharing the same collective thing that, you know what, our leaders in the Middle East are still kings and they're still post-colonial dictators, and like the Mubarak in Egypt, where it really erupted. After it went to Tunisia, it went into Egypt, it went up the west into Morocco and Algeria and all those areas. And then it went big in Syria, but unfortunately it triggered a whole lot of very nasty stuff that Syria is still trying to recover from. So, this is what can happen. It was the revolution was abducted by ISIS and Islamic extremists. And then the president of Assad overreacted. I saw the videos. He thought he'd play a card out of his father's card of doing things, Hafez al-Assad, by going hard on one city that had gone radical when he was alive, just razed the city. Dumb move. He's not made mistakes like that since, but that was a big mistake, and he's still paying for it all these years. But actually, I think he's a pretty good leader. Leaders are human; they make mistakes, and when leaders make mistakes, people die. And so anyway, but I consider him a better leader than all in all than that. It's not Saddam Hussein. He's not those people. Even Saddam Hussein doesn't get a fair shake because Saddam Hussein, we always judge him by our own values, which we don't follow ourselves. Just give him lip service. But you got to try to understand how to deal with a country like Iraq, which is really three countries. Now, the Turks understood how to deal with it during their empire. They were never one country. They were Kurdistan, the Shia northwestern part with Baghdad and Mosul, and the majority Iraqis who are Shiites. And they made sure they had all their separate little districts, and there was no problems until after the war, Iraq with Sykes-Picot redesigning the map of Middle East after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. That's when troubles started, creating Saudi Arabia, creating Kuwait. Kuwait was actually a part of Iraq, and the reason why the white guys, the French and the British and later the Americans were doing that is they were trying to set up the areas of the Arab world so the smallest populations would have the most oil. It was easier then to control them in a kind of shadow colonial way. And that's why Kuwait suddenly had this emirate, which had all this. And they were side drilling into the Ramallah oil field, that is Iraqi's oil field. And actually, Saddam Hussein had grounds to attack them because that was an act of war. They were sucking the oil into their country. It wasn't enough that they had one of the biggest fields. They were also sucking Iraq, which at the time looked like it was like the third or second largest potential resource. That was the one area they couldn't divide up. So it's the one area where more people had access to potentially being sovereign through their oil than the other Arab nations. So it became a problem. And because it was powerful, it became a problem for Israel. So Israel made sure that Saddam Hussein went down. But, remember that America was actually helping Saddam Hussein fight in this offensive idiot thing that he did with the Iranians, which he was losing. And then you had All the Americans come in, give him the satellite coordinates so that he can aim, give him the means to create mustard gas and the missiles to kill hundreds of thousands of Iranian soldiers and civilians. So, and he used to be also employed by the CIA before he became president of Iraq. So, I mean, this good or evil is very subjective with these power types because you're good as long as you do our work for us. You're evil when you don't. And so it's a little more mixed bag with a lot of leaders in the Middle East, like Saddam Hussein and all. And so anyway, this spring of this, what they called all those revolutions that crossed over the Arab world, they called them the spring revolutions, the spring, Arab Spring revolutions, because it started, spring comes earlier in the Middle East. It was in February, and then when in 2012 it was solidified, and that's when the transit of Neptune really began. After the little dip, there was a few months back in Aquarius, and then it went full bore into Pisces, and it's been there ever since. Now, dial back to the last time the cycle of all the 12 zodiacs was passed through by Neptune. You get 1848. 1849. Significant years in Europe, and it was spring when it came. There was popular rebellions of Europeans, like the farmers are starting to do. People went to the streets, started in France, and ended up in the German states and Prussia and in Austro-Hungarian Empire. Actually, it became Hungarian because of the revolutions that happened in 1848 and 1849. Saxony, all the German states also had people. If you love the movie, if you love Les Miserables, that was the 1830 revolution, but it's very similar. People, the workers, people were getting wealthier, but the powers, they were still held by elite, aristocratic controlling governments. I mean, don't be surprised that Europe is not very democratic right now, that the EU is really a technocratic dictatorship that used the votes for enough to establish it, but then does not give a one whit about what the people want. Europe is not a place that has been conducive to democracy. It's been anti-democratic in the name of democracy. I mean, America was free of all that and was able to really try to create democracy, but there's still that force in Europe that would rather sit on people being too free, these peasants. And that means that Europe is going to have revolutionary things happen to it, especially tasting it in this time where it's in Aquarius now, Pluto, the great age era shifter and changer of astrology, the stage and the climate in which the stage is performing all of our shows, is in now going into humanitarian questioning, revolution, the divine right of individuals, sovereignty, and the suspicion of elitist power groups that would turn our religious passions against us. And so the farmers, now, what happened in 1848 was called the European Spring Revolutions. And then 164 years after a 15-year hiatus, it comes back to 2011, and it's the Arab Spring Revolutions. I see that with the years that are left in the final intense degrees of this transit of Neptune through Pisces, is that we're setting up for a European spring set of rebellions and revolutions again, maybe in 2024, and no later than 2025 in this country. So it is the farmers have begun it. They had to begin it early because they can't do it in spring. They got to go back to their farms and start planting. So that's why they hit in the dead of winter. And it seems like they've gotten some ground with German governments, other governments who are promising to cut back on that WEF, that World Economic Foreign politicians' manipulation to put taxes on the farmers to put them out of business by 1/3. And say, oh, you can't use a natural gas to create fertilizer because it's a greenhouse gas. And so they're literally saying to you all, it'll happen here too, it's happening there. We're going to cut your food intake by 1/3. What could happen with that? Well, famine, bread riots. These idiots don't understand that they're literally building their own guillotines to be sliced. These idiots in Davos and Bill Gates and all these buffoons of great power, these these stupid aristocrats of our time. Oh, let them eat cake. Oh, isn't that cute? Oh, yes, so cute. The peasants on wash masses. Oh, or and then they're knocking on the door like I did last time, and they're there, and that's aristocracies are bullies. They have a quality about maybe they're more stylish about it and frou-frou up and have more culture and give to the arts and all that, but they behave in the psychology of a bully. They have judged, and partly rightfully, because we are responsible for being servient little fools, just by our lack of interest in our political futures. Because if you don't defend it that way, then you're having to fight for it and die for it. And I mean, it happened to the 13th colonies, with overtaxation to the point that people were going bankrupt. They were the taxes, which are only being hurled on those colonies, not the others, because of the French Indian Wars. They felt that all colonists should pay for it, which it was not feasible, and it was literally destroying farms and hard, industry. It was destroying our businesses in the colonies because of these tariffs and taxes and a tax on paper and all these ridiculous ideas that of one of the most devoted colonial outposts of the British Empire by this abuse from Parliament and King George over the years turned us into radicals. They did it because they gave these people no life. If they didn't find a way to change this, their lives, their livelihoods, their ability to make a living would be destroyed. And when you go that far, like when you say you're going to basically take down 1/3 of the farming revenue and deny people their ability to make fertilizers, you've just said to the farmers, we're going to destroy you. And that's why they're in the cities. That's why they're shooting shit on on all the government buildings. I have a lot of videos of that. It's very funny. I even have this somebody created out on X an amazing shot of all these guys doing that to the big round Tower of Babel of glass and steel. That's where all these European Union high uppy ups live. They're Versailles. And so this is going to grow because it's not just farmers that are on the line economically. I mean, all these people never learn, these bullies. They just think that they can keep kicking you down and kicking you down, and you're just gonna take it. I mean, but it always happens. And they're completely surprised, these elites, when it happens to them. Nobody in the 300-400 years of the Romanov dynasty could have imagined that these dumb Russian laborers and peasants and all would rise up and take them down. But they had the precedents, the French Revolution, other revolutions in Europe, but they don't learn. It's like when they keep invading Russia, like NATO is using some fool, the Ukrainian government, to destroy their country. By the way, there's a lot of revolution people. They're not going to do the 500,000 call up. They first off don't have the money because Congress will not pay for this thing anymore, as I predicted in September they would do, and because they're already saying enough of this mess. And so the rum when some of these teams of people, Shanghaiing people, they've been going around villages and taking all the men out of the village. How's a village going to function? Sending them to the meat grinder, as they all call it. But I've seen footage where some of these villages all ganged up on these people and kicked the crap out of them and kicked them out of their town. So that's how it starts. So these people, the bully never sees it coming until somebody knocks them on their bum. And then they are so surprised. It's like they never imagined their world dominance could be so easily knocked on its bum. And that's coming. It's coming. It's the farmers started it. It's going to start with all the machinists, and it's going to start with all the factory workers in Europe who are seeing their factories shut down and move to China or America. It's going to spread all through Europe, and watch Europe carefully with real sources, not the idiot CNN and all those idiot Fox and all those people. It's like, unless you like to be lied to in a left-leaning or right-leaning way, go ahead, enjoy yourself, but you're going to miss what's happening, and it could very much impact your lives. And so, come to my get on my Hogue Prophecy report, and you will see my sources. You'll be able to check everything I'm saying and then see their sources and more sources. And then you're going to get into the alternative media, which is where the real media, the fourth estate, has moved. That the Constitution put in our Constitution, the only profession it put as an integral part, it was not part of the government, a free press. You cannot have democracy if you don't have a free press. You then have the Bayern Bioblätter, the Nazi newspaper, as your only newspaper in Munich after Hitler became powerful. All the other newspapers in Kowtow, that's what happened. In fact, some very brave journalists stood up against Hitler, and of course they were the first people to go to concentration camps. So that kind of stuff is looming around now. For me or anybody else who believes in free speech, it is and wants to spread it, because you cannot have a democracy if you do not have a free press. And the free press is there. It has moved out of all the mainstream news, and it's growing in cyberspace. And the mainstream news outlets, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, the legacy, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them are losing audiences. The good news is a lot of you are recognizing that this is all crap, and you're not being informed. You're being treated like a child and being told what to think. And whether it's right leaning or left, it's all the same bunk. And people are moving to the alternative media. They're either doing that or they're just shutting down, which is worse. Don't shut down, even though it can be scary. Don't shut down, because if you do that, then your passivity is aiding this evil or taking the freedoms of the world. So anyway, it's times of revolution. They will get more, because as we're getting a taste of it now, and then by the beginning of next year, Pluto now continues full on into its revolutionary Aquarian age ideas, as the final 2 years of the Piscean mass message to masses of individuals is taking light. Like one guy burning himself, and suddenly everybody knows about him, and it tried to change the Arab world. It's so it'll often be little things like that, some little guy, and then it spreads all over the place. So watch out for that, because that's kind of way these things happen. The O is revolution is born out of the bitter womb of economic collapse. And that is also coming. It's coming to Europe, willfully taken down by the American administration that is currently here. They decided to blow those pipelines. But as Vladimir Putin said in another Aquarian Age moment, Tucker Carlson, leaving mainstream news, is in an evolution of his consciousness in this journey that he's in, and he's sharing it with all of us. that was a great seed planted him on the 9th of February, giving millions of Americans a first look at how Vladimir Putin really is, not the ogre house elf creature of evil that cartoon that Putin has been given. You saw he was a real guy. He was very frank about the things that were happening. He actually said that, and he meant this with great respect after the thing. He said, Tucker Carlson, he's a dangerous journalist. I had this whole attitude that he was going to come at me strong and hard like I usually get from Americans and other, because he hadn't done interviews with him for a long time, but he was pulled to Tucker. But it ended up, he said he threw me off. Now, this is how honest Putin is. He's saying it to right out. He's saying, I was really thrown off. I was not expecting him to come through that way. It kind of threw me off. I don't know if I even liked the interview, but it was very honest. I mean, would you ever see Biden say that, or Trump? Wow, I caught me by surprise. I was a bit vulnerable. There's a man who's safe in his skin, and that's the kind of man you want having power, not men who can't voice their mistakes. I mean, he was cornered. I think we talked about it in another episode of this that and it's on video. He that same Russian that he likes to interview him, and it is always he likes interviews where it's all out there in the open, and critical, and he's not afraid of, like this guy said, don't this war. What was your fault in creating this war, President Putin? I mean, what do you think was your big mistake that is a part of why we're at war with Ukraine and NATO by proxy? And his body language, just watch the body language. He was not like, you know, well, I have nothing wrong. The whole fortress of solitude comes up, and he's like, well, I guess all stiff. But no, he did this. He kind of, when he heard the guy say it, he kind of rolled his eyes like, oh. He did that. It was like, what? Yeah. Well, and he immediately said, I'm naive. I've been naive. I love the West, and it's blinded me. And it took me a long time, and I should have done this special operation years ago. That's my fault. I'm too naive, but I'm learning. Where do you hear leaders say that? Especially leaders with such influence in the world. And he's okay. He's like a guy, just speaking frankly and openly. But here's probably the most significant world leader in our lives right now, who really may very well be the person that is helping Russia become what Edgar Casey, I've talked about this before, but I'll say it again, very important prophecy, that in our times, Russia is supposed to be the hope of the world. Somehow through Russia, we avoid destroying ourselves. We make it through this difficult time. And I would say that Tucker Carlson's 2 hours with him was a significant historical seed event. In the prophecy field, I'm usually writing about things that only years from now the mainstream will go, it all started with Tucker talking to Putin and getting a lot of people in the West, hundreds of millions now, to see the guy as he really is, to see that he doesn't. I mean, he's right there being frank about it. Russians have no interest in advancing. They don't even want to take up Ukraine, but it's being forced upon them because Nazis cannot be next to the border, and NATO cannot put missiles in Ukraine that could take out Moscow in 3 minutes any more than Kennedy could tolerate missiles in Cuba. It's exactly the same. Worse, actually, because the Soviet Union never intended to push war on us. They thought that would calm us down. They'd misread us because they didn't understand. Americans have never had big empires around their borders. We had Canada and Mexico, and we were the big mamu. But I mean, it was in Khrushchev's basically just made the mistake, but he immediately understood his mistake and started to backtrack the whole thing, just as Kennedy was trying to stop us from going to war by having to handle his joint chiefs of warmongers. And so yeah, that was that was mistakes, but great men make mistakes, but the great leaders of our world learn from them and become better through their mistakes. The mediocre leaders, they hide their mistakes from themselves and others and bring the world disaster. And so this is these are whirlwind times. And at this point, what of the themes that we talked about have we not talked about yet?
Well, we talked about Tucker.
Yeah.
I do have a question for you.
Okay.
What's your take on, have you heard anything about New York truckers?
Yes. Just today I
Yeah, yeah,
I just
potentially
saw,
doing
see,
a boycott.
yes. Well, I've been thinking, I mean, where farmers would take a run at it in Europe, I've always felt when the gas gets too expensive, that all the rolling stock guys, all the truckers, if the truckers in this country stopped trucking, this country would stand still and powers in Washington would have to listen. I mean, they had a little of that in the freedom trucking thing that happened in Ottawa in Canada. And that's of course failed. And they invoked a emergency powers rule, which is only used when Canada is being attacked in a war. But they used it against their own people, stole their trucks, ruined their lives. Hundreds of them are still languishing in jail after over 700 days, a little bit like January 6th. These people haven't had trials yet either, most of them. Tucker's looking at all that open stock video of what happened, got some of them free, like Bison Man. He's now free and he's actually running for Congress, I think. So, um, but then what happened is another good turn. The Supreme, what is, I don't know the title of it, but the Supreme Court of Canada rescinded their right. Janet England, the deputy prime minister, and Trudeau, I call him, the much now hated prime minister of by Canada, of what he did when all the truckers wanted to do was talk to him. And he was such a cowardly little guy, you know, a man child. He was too afraid to go out and talk to them. They just wanted to talk to him. So they brought the whole half of Canadians' trucks and planted them, and they didn't block the streets. They were on an area where they could be. But sometimes they would be honking to remind people that they were there. And then some of the people that had businesses were going, I don't like this, shut them down, shut them down. I wonder if those people would do that a second time because they gave grounds for this fascist move. And I hope they've seen that, yeah, it's annoying. Protesting is annoying. But if you are informed of what's going on, you understand why the truckers might blockade New York and no trucks going into New York because of I mean, one thing New York is doing and New York State is doing is the actual objectifiable proof that this whole invasion, it is an invasion of undocumented people, which we've never done in our immigration policies before, are coming in. And actually, I have the video in this next run of articles where Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is with his opposite, the minority leader, the Democrats. I can't think of his name at the moment. He's kind of anyway, kind of person, but anyway, gray
Isn't it
skin.
Mnuchin? Wasn't it Mnuchin?
No, 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 it's Sadler, or something like that. His name sounds like that.
Hmm.
Like Adler, Sadler. Um, you know, anyway, when he had power in Congress, he was insufferable. He wouldn't let people talk. He was such a tyrant. Well, anyway, Mike is more jovial and stuff. So he was saying, well, why? I think we know why you're bringing all these people in because you want them to vote. I mean, you've got they're talking about it in New York, and that's I think part of the trucker thing, and they're talking about it, I think, in another state in New England, can't remember which. And he says, well, they're already starting to test the waters of and then Nadler is his name, Congressman Nadler, then the minority head of House of Representatives said, well, actually, they're only going to do it for municipal elections. And of course, Mike said, well, there you have it, folks. He's just said it. The first step, going to start with municipal and go up from there. It's like here he is, the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives is on board for illegal aliens to vote even in municipal elections. To start with, it's not going to end there. This is an attempt to demographically make this a one-party system, a democratic country only in the party's name, and something more Soviet. Because Soviet Union had a one-party system. In the Cold War, they used to say, "Oh, we have a democracy. Everybody goes out to vote. 90% of everybody in the Soviet Union votes." They go and they vote for their person they want in power. Yeah, but it's all the same party. And, there's no opposition. And I did find some very interesting things that John Adams and George Washington, I think in his farewell address after his second term, it may be in that speech, but he had his Eisenhower with the military industrial complex moment. And he was saying he could see that our republic will be doomed if we ever get locked into a two-party system. Because I bet if I did a mock poll and said um, uh, that our Constitution actually made it legal to have parties in a two-party system. Yeah, how many people know that that's true? And I probably have 58% of people saying it's true. Obviously, haven't read the Constitution. No, not even parties are mentioned in the Constitution. And when parties started to develop early in the United States, and with this idea of a two-party system by the end of Washington's second term, he really was seeing the writing on the wall like Eisenhower was seeing about the military industrial complex making our country a perpetual war maker because if peace happens in the world, they're out of business. And quagmires are actually quite profitable. I mean, that was 20 years of profits for the Afghani debacle. And there was like 11 years of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Boy, they had to replace a lot of Humvees that got blown up by roadside bombs and all of that they could replace. I mean, my God, military industrial complex had to replace 12,000 Huey helicopters in the Vietnam War. So, cha-ching, the most morally bankrupt thing I can imagine is people who profit. I mean, that's it's worse as slavery or worse because they're actually not just working people to death. You're killing them. You're just killing and ruining, causing terrible stuff. And we're stuck in that darkness. We have a warmongering addiction and the world's turning against us. You won't hear about it in your mainstream news. The world still loves Americans. Putin loves Americans. And but he says, but your government is just. My master loved America. He talked about the Constitution all the time before they even started abusing it and getting him poisoned by arresting him without a warrant for immigration fraud because he won all the cases that they put, these spurious cases to try to just politically get him to leave, and then we'd all leave. And then when he was arrested and out of the country, they openly admitted to it. Ed Meese and his Justice Department and Turner, the main guy who was going after Osho for immigration fraud, he came out a few weeks after Osho left the country and said, "Oh yeah, we tried 4 years. We never could legally take him out. So we had an idea. Oh, well, we're just going to take the Bhagwan out. We'll arrest him for something, and then we'll run him through the penitentiary system." And and Osho wanted to fight it. And his lawyers, disciples were like crying, saying, you don't understand. He said, well, I always fight things like this because it's not right. I didn't do this. No, it's not about that. It's something worse, Osho, or Bhagwan in those days. That's what we call him. They've hinted to us that what happened to you in the prisons will happen again, and they have the power to delay your trial until you're dead and buried, and maybe die of suspicious causes. So you have, for the sake of us and your teaching, leave this country, because you're never going to be able to fight that trial. They'll make sure you never live long enough to do it. And it's like what I said earlier in that year in 1985, when Osho was winning all of his trials. I was saying to some friends, and I was in the Oregon Commune, and I was saying, it was odd because it just came out of me. I wasn't even really that mindful of what it really meant, but I just suddenly started saying, it's funny. I think about Martin Luther King a lot when I think about Osho's legal battles. I mean, Martin Luther King won all his civil rights battles, and he was coming back again with the poor people's camp idea, and he was coming back after an awful year because of his statements about Vietnam being against the war against poverty. And most of the poor people are going to fight and die in it, and it would not work. He was really being rebellious and a true firebrand. And it was a terrible year for him. But he just shouldered it on as Martin Luther King did. And he was coming out of it, but then he was shot in Memphis. And I said, you know what? When the American powers that be cannot use lawfare to suppress people they are threatened by for just being free, they choose the other option. And I'm afraid Osho's harm will be done to Osho because they can't take him down legally.
Mhm.
And I see that problem for Robert Kennedy Jr., and I see that problem for Trump. It's obvious. It's blatant. Not even subtle, these people. At least banana republics are a little more subtle. They make it look honorable. But they're right out there. I mean, it's kind of
It's
strange.
interesting you said that because I believe about 8 hours ago, Ari Fletcher was on Fox, and he used the term, this is a banana republic because of what's
Mhm.
going on in New York with the whole case with Trump.
Yeah, it's a zoo. It's banana republics behave better. And unfortunately, I never thought I'd see the day. But compared to the genocides of the Zionists, the Nazis had they were a little more subtle about it. It's like, and people are seeing that too. Is that how can you guys be even more, this Zionist government of Netanyahu, be so right up front with it? I mean, in a way, it's great, it's honest. The Nazis tried to hide the concentration camps, and these guys are like, look at this. It's like they're grabbing, it's like right in your face, and they don't seem to get it. They're so isolated in their mindset from what the world is seeing, even worse than we are. Um, it's
Well,
crazy. But
there's a
that's what
couple.
happens. I'll just say, just finishing that,
Yeah.
and then that's what happens when the mind plague starts affecting the psychosphere of the psychic health of the world, by having so many extra people not living consciously and spewing out their emotions and stuff. It tends to change our concept of the new normal. you
Mhm.
know we can let Stoltenberg openly talk about nuclear preemptive nuclear strike on Russian forces. He was talking about that before the war started. If he had said that in the Cold War, it could have started immediately an attack. No one would even dream of saying stuff like that. That's because we have, in the disease that's overtaking psychically the world, people are more able to accept unacceptable behavior as normal. And so that's the difference between the evil Nazis being a little more sophisticated and Netanyahu being hang out right out there with it. It's and not being even aware that it's making him look like what he is, insane. And but that's where we are. So I gotta circle that square, or square that circle with this one last statement, is that um, you can't, because it's so out there, it will have an ability, like I've talked about how coal, it's like coal, it's darkness, and it's putting a lot of pressure on all of us, but it creates diamonds that way. So it means that people will respond at a certain point, people respond and rebel against it. And that's good. That brings in a revolutionary new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of communing with each other. And that's where we're heading down the next 20 years. Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple things that there are similarities and there are differences between what's been going on in Europe and what's going on in the United States with the truckers.
Mm.
All right. And the similarities is that there are hardworking people that are getting fed up with the system, and they feel as though they have to lash out somehow, some way to get their representatives to pay attention to them.
Yeah,
The
they have to.
difference, yeah, the difference is, but both have to do some sort of rebellious
Yeah.
activity.
Outrageous thing they never dream, but they're being pushed to it
Right,
because their survival's at stake. That's
right,
happened in
right,
all the revolutions.
right. Here's the difference that I see between what's going on, at least contemporary, with Europe and the United States. What's going on in Europe is a little bit more sophisticated,
Mm.
because they're saying the farmers are going, well, wait a minute, this is an Uber government dictating to us that will destroy our livelihood and potentially the livelihood, not just of the farmers, but the livelihood of the society,
Famine
because of some
across
sort,
Europe.
exactly, because of some sort of subjective carbon emission
Yeah,
number that no
yeah,
one can agree on.
yeah.
So, so they're more like fighting for society. All right,
Mm.
all right. That with what's going on with the truckers, if it does happen, which I hope it does, and it
I
kind of
hope it
seems
does
almost,
too.
it almost seems it's like a medieval siege on the city of York.
Well, that's what the French did this month. For 5 days, they stopped all food coming into Paris, and the shelves started to get empty and said, look, you need us. We feed
Right,
you. They're saying this is our power. And even the
right.
globalists have to eat. And so, yeah, so go ahead.
But the difference here with the truckers, if it does happen, I hope it does, is that it's it's more messianic. They're viewing it as this is what they're doing against Trump, and he's our leader, he's
Yeah,
our candidate, and we are going to, do whatever we can to, to express discontent because you're against our leader.
yeah.
And I think this is the worry I have with the American public, and especially with what I saw happen. I don't want to bring up the term because I want this video up, but
Right.
what we saw with the crisis that ensued in 2020, and
Yes.
even a couple of years later, where you had the formula issue for the children,
Yeah.
there, right? And where was the outcry from the mothers? It was a perfect example of to actually protest
Yeah.
so you can feed your kid, but they didn't.
Yeah.
So the problem here is, even though our ethos as a country has been born in the crucible of rebellion, right,
Yeah.
and revolution,
Yeah.
in a modern society, I feel as though just that most of the population is too passive,
Yeah.
too much bread and circus, and the
Yeah.
ones that are willing to do something, it's almost they gravitate to a messianic figure. And I think this is a major problem with
Yeah, it
America
is.
versus what we're seeing in Europe.
It's very American, because America, whether likes it or not, it still has in its deep fiber a very religious energy. Maybe it's gone into a secular space. I mean, during the Civil War, I mean, one of the reasons why all the generals had big long beards is they wanted to look like prophets as well as as generals. You know, it was like I've always thought it'd be a great book. The one unwritten book in a very well written subject is taking the Old Testament, the U.S. Civil War on the battlefield of the Bible. You had both sides very religious, and both sides, the abolitionists and the slave owners, could cite the Bible as giving them cover, divine cover, for having slaves or releasing slaves. Um, and um, it's too bad I couldn't clone myself, because I can't. I have too many other things to write about, but I can at least write about them in an essay length. But that is, that's one of the more important lessons that you really brought up as something to deal with. Our mess. I mean, glory, glory, hallelujah. I mean, we're all, it's messianic. There was a lot of messianic fever in the Civil War, but also what was very beautiful and a terrible thing of that war. Some of the greatest things in that awful war came up, and I often think of Robert E. Lee, who um, who was such a man who mused and contemplated things that happened, and he actually was going to be picked by Lincoln to run the Union Army, but when Virginia joined the rest of the Confederate States, he said, I can't do it. I can't fight my own people. Because, in those days, your people of your state were first over the Union. And that may be coming back. I think it is coming back. I've been seeing it for 20, 30 years, that the United States is that, which was the linking verb bought by the blood of a million people, if you add the civilians and slaves and the 600,000 soldiers in the Civil War, was bathed in the blood that was America the United States became the United States is. Shelby Foote was the person, the great Civil War scholar and historian who made that point. I think it's a very remarkable point, because it's a battle of linking verbs. And about 20 years ago, I started to see that, we're going to shift the linking verbs from is to are again. It's a cycle. And this thing that happened in Texas with all the 26 other states that were going to send down their National Guards if the Texas National Guard was federalized. That was a significant move towards this kind of potential of a hybrid conflict in this. It's either a cold civil war or it's a revolution civil war hybrid. And the blue and the gray are becoming the red and the blue and the red. And the edges of the country are blue, but the center is red. And so it's not going to be like the Civil War where you have two units. It's going to be more like what I've been writing about most of my life, this 9 civil wars that were inspired or made Nostradamus risk his life to write his history of the future, because it was going to be triggered by the king dying in a jousting accident, which would bring his children, who were infants and childs, not ready to be kings, and then the Huguenots and the Catholics, which were not like one's part of France is all Huguenot and the other was all checkerboard. Well, we're kind of a checkerboard too, and so I think there'll be qualities of the French Huguenot, French Catholics wars of religion, civil wars. There were 9 of them. They raged from 1562 all the way to 1598, and 9 of them, and it was just a little respite before going at it again. It had this quality of being a mafia war as much as between royal houses as it was a lot of assassinations and all that. So, I'm So a different kind of civil war. But yes, the messianic fever, I'm trying to think of a way to alchemically, I think it is dangerous that people make a shining messiah out of someone. Um, and it's like what I used to say about what I think was, because Trump is the last of three first presidents to have the same affliction astrologically, which has really altered things, had a big part in making George W. Bush, Obama, and Trump um, uh, struggling with a fundamental delusion. The first two presidents, the delusion of the sun squared Neptune in their birth charts, made them delusional when they checked their gut about what was true and not true. Bush thought he had a higher father because he had his father envy with Poppy Bush. And he openly said it. I like, basically, God tells me to invade Iraq, and I did. He literally said that, and disaster after disaster. So he was a person who was not listening to his gut; he was listening to his demons, um, his hidden enemies. And Obama was more fortunate that he had a lot of other countermeasures in his astrology, but it made it trickier for him to see what it was his weak point. His was winning the impossible woman, which he did in the case of his wife. But so he sublimated that sexual desire to win the American people. I'm the black man that's going to become the first black president, and that will help me understand my trouble with my own identity. Because his first book was really good. His second book was just a boring speech, Obama's speech. But his first book was very, very honest in his struggle with: am I a black man with a white mother, or am I a white man with a black father? And so he was really struggling with it. And I was saying, well, what would really be wonderful, just be a man of both. You are a bridge of races. What if you could reconcile that? You would be the bridge between black people and white people as our leader. But he couldn't do it. He was stuck in the Neptune square sun issue of it's got to be this or it's that. And so he took that, and he got, within 2 weeks of being president, he had the famous gathering. I think I spoke about this before, where all the Republican conservative leaders in politics and in media had a dinner with him, and they, so many words said, we're going to do everything we can to make you a 4-year president, and none of your agenda is going to get passed. And rather than take that as like Assad of Syria would take it, because he famously said, when Trump said, oh yeah, we're taking this oil, I'm not going to hide it, we won this oil, we fought the ISIS people, and it's ours, and we're taking the spoils. And so it just shows how a much more wise a politician uh, Assad is. He said, it is always good to have transparent enemies. And Obama, if he had the ability to say, well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for warning me. Thanks for giving me a warning. You are too transparent for your own good. And then what he should have done is put all of his media, all of his cachet, his political capital, those 8 million people that were online helping him, this huge army of people that could be calling up all those Republicans and all the Democrats and telling them, look, this is what we're at war. We're at a political war with the Republican Party. They don't want the black man that you all voted for to have his change that he wants to believe in. Then he could have gone into the press and he could have made it a daily drum beat. These people don't want the black man in the White House. And then, I mean, that's what I would have advised him. I said, look, you have 2 years with running. You can do the Supreme Court. You've got the House and the Senate and your executive branch. You may very well lose that in 2 years. So take these 24 months and use them well. You've already spent a half a month wasting their time with these people who don't want the black man in office. So man up, get it, know you're in a political war, and set a stage so that you actually increase your control of the House and the Senate in the by-election, in the midterms. Otherwise, you're not, they're going to succeed. You're not going to get much done. But Obama, blinded by that, oh, this girl's being hard to get. These guys are like that girl. I've got to win them over. Then I really have value. If I've won all the white people to vote for me. Now I got to try to win over these people who hate me. And so he put all of his energy into trying to bring those people over the Jordan River into his world. And he was blind to the fact that he just pissed all of his political capital away. That's what Neptune squared the sun did to Barack Hussein Obama. Now, Trump does not have it in his birth chart, thank goodness. So there's hope for him. He has a lot of very interesting things in his chart. I will have to bring out that book again if he's elected and write the third and final book that I had planned for his second term, which is coming 4 years late. His Neptune square is his sun is squared Neptune in the U.S. birth chart in Virgo. And or no, it's yeah, anyway, I can't think right now. It's been working since 7 so in the morning. So it's like, anyway, he's got the square in the American birth chart, his chart. And I think it was a position of where his yeah. So what that means, all psychobabble aside, what that means is that Neptune in Virgo rules economic boom bust cycles in the American astrology. So it was funny how he was saying he had this big boom happening. He was really pushing this. It was illusion. He was just he basically was lucky enough because he's very lucky. His north node is incredibly lucky, surprisingly lucky. He put out. He was kept saying all this malarkey about how this boom was happening. But really, what it was a pre-inflationary thing that was going to pop, and it popped. And when Biden took over, it not only popped, Biden was fool enough to actually enhance it by spending $2 trillion some dollars and just making it locked in for a next greater depression. Now, Trump's BS about economic and boom ended up revealing itself as what it was, as I predicted, a bust. And it hit Biden. But now, if he's reelected, he's going to be a depression president. And it's his karma because that was BS. It wasn't an improvement. It was it was almost like I was saying in my metaphor. It's like, when a bubble of soap, when a bubble is really thin, it really irradiates lots of rainbow patterns, and oh, isn't that nice? It's just going to get more and more rip off. It pops because it's so thin, it pops. He was talking rainbows on soap bubbles, and it popped during Biden. And if he's president, he's going to have to clean it up. I don't know if he can. He has to grow up a lot, and I think it'll be very interesting to see if he's learned a couple important things. One is that because he is such a wide open channel, he channels anything that's in front of him, and because the deep state knows that, they probably say, well, he's very gullible, so let's have Mike Pompeo just be very kissy and fondle his ego and make, when he gets his ego fondled, he just goes blind and does what and Pompeo is a very shifty CIA kind of guy, a liar and all of that. And he really manipulated Trump. He was put there by the CIA and managed himself from being head of CIA to be the Secretary of State finally. CIA as Secretary of State. Yeah. So he was playing Trump, and I hope Trump can have that come to Jesus moment like Putin said, hey, I've been naive with the Europeans. I don't know if that's going to happen. So Trump's problem is that the delusion is a very interesting interface of the American people and Trump. They both are unfairly projecting what they want each other to be, but not really seeing how they really are. Just like romances where people put on a great face and they fall in love with the images, the propaganda that they're both exuding so that they will find love and intimacy and all of that. And then a day comes in so many of those kind of relationships where the man and the woman will say, you're not the woman I married, you're not the man I married. No, because you guys were projecting a false face. And so what's happening here is a metaphor I use where Trump is one with a false face looking at two women representing the voting people that voted Trump in. One is a very upset larger blue woman. And because it was by electoral college, the red woman is a smaller woman. The blue woman is driving herself into a mental illness with her Trump derangement syndrome. She can't see anything good about him. He's the devil incarnate. But she's in delusion because that's also not true. The little Republican is a worshipful, messianic, trusting woman who looks at him, if not, in fact, they even talked about it. And of course, the blue news doesn't get it right. And when Christians cite Cyrus the Great, Persia, as a vehicle of God, the illiterate, biblically illiterate blue woke people were saying, oh, they want him to be Jesus. No, just why don't you just open up a Bible for 5 minutes and read, the restoration of Israel after the Babylonian captivity, so you at least know what they're really thinking, because of course they have the presumption that these people don't think, but then do the people having that judgment, are they thinking by not reading the Bible and finding out what exactly is going on here? Because Cyrus the Great defeated Babylonia, absorbed it into his empire, Persian Empire, and then he helped restore, and the Israelites restore their two kingdoms. And so he did. So they look at him as, not a person that's going to be saved, but a person who God used as an instrument. So Christians don't see Donald Trump as Christ. They see him as Cyrus and as a tool of God, an instrument of God. So it's not quite as messianic, and they like him, but he's not one of the chosen. He's being an instrument, and they like him, and they liked Cyrus. I mean, the Judah and Israel loves Cyrus because he saved them, and thank you, Cyrus. And they even adopted a lot of Zoroastrian influence into Judaic religion, which kind of, you have to go, the Kabbalist core of true ancient Israeli Judaic religion was kind of put aside for something a little more Zoroastrian. That's how much they loved this instrument of God. And when he restored, and then that allowed them to build the temple and start that again. And so the so Trump is a vehicle of the mystery, so it's one step back from really being messianic, I hope. And yeah, so yeah, it's I think the truckers will be our version of the farmers. And it makes sense, Europe is so much more a master and advanced in food and Epicureanism and all, and all of that, that it's no wonder that the people who really got making food down that would be the point. But then you go to America, we're the wanderers, the pioneers. We used to do it in covered wagons or as mountain men with our mules and stuff, trekking across vast tracts of this country. Well, aren't the truckers kind of poetically that, all alone in the middle of the night in the middle of America, just the wind whipping through their windows and their great trucks. They're the wanderers, they're the explorers. There's a quality about it. So in a way, truckers here in this country, and a bit too in Canada because it's even a bigger country, um, it has that spirit and that pioneer kind of spirit might of individual sovereignty, which is one of the things very important that we're losing in this country. A bunch of individual sovereign truckers do their own thing, but they got to sometimes come together, to take care of a city
Well,
that's becoming a petri dish for the complete demographic loss of our country.
the things that pop in my mind when you were saying that, one was, remember that the what was it called? It wasn't Puppy Chow, it was the commercial back in the 70s where it was this Chuck Wagon. Chuck Wagon was the commercial.
Oh, okay.
And
I
they
don't
had
think I
this,
saw the Chuck Wagon.
all right. So there was
No,
this,
maybe it's an East
and so,
Coast thing. It's an East
well,
Coast thing. I know Puppy
so there
Chow.
was this commercial where it was like the settlers going into the West, and it was just a dog food commercial, and it was like the food, if you just added water, would be gravy, and so
Oh
it was
yeah, okay.
Chuck Wagon, I think it was the brand.
Chuck Wagon.
Chuck,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that popped in my mind when you were saying that, but
came on all the time when I was watching Bonanza. A big
so the
Bonanza.
other thing that pops in my mind is this a little bit more modern take on it, is that truckers, they travel from East Coast to West Coast, and they're going through flyover country,
Yeah,
and they're driving late at night, and they're alone, right? They go to the diner to
they're
get
the
something
mountain
to
men of
eat.
our time.
Right. And and they're on their CB, they're, talking to, breaker, Johnny, are you there? Type thing.
What's your
And,
handle?
right. So, but that's their life, that's the way they live. And so anyone that travels for, especially through Pennsylvania,
Yeah,
so I've, driven, through, from New York all the way to Michigan, you go through Pennsylvania, and that long drive through Pennsylvania, you get a little bit of a glimpse of that long haul,
yeah,
mentality, and you listen to the radio, and you hear a lot of country, and it's a different culture, it's a different mentality.
it is.
And I just hope that they do galvanize, and you know you know metaphorically put the middle finger to the big cities,
Yeah,
like New York, and because what is interesting in New York is that you have a lot of, it's obviously a liberal environment, right? Very liberal.
even the Republicans are
And
liberal.
even the Republicans are liberal, it's very liberal and sanctuary city.
Yeah,
But even though it was a sanctuary city, it didn't really feel that big blast of illegal immigration until just lately. So you're even seeing, you're now starting to see liberals getting angry
they
about the
crossed that
immigration
line,
policy. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
crossed
yeah,
that revolutionary line in New York.
yeah, yeah. So what's weird is that now you have that New York Times, reader,
Mm.
especially the Sunday magazine out of the New York Times, and all the liberal bias that's in it. They're now like starting to question, well, wait a minute here. Our society can't afford it. We're getting taxed more. The crime is
Oh,
absolutely atrocious in New York.
I've seen on videos on X all the time. I'm shocked. It's a lot. It's a complete unraveling of civilization. It really
Yeah,
that has to be stopped.
yeah, yeah. So you have, people are getting fed up with going to Walgreens or CVS and seeing everything locked down, behind a cabinet, and then you have to hit a button to get a sales rep to just get a, a little container of rice, or or
It's just stuff like this that
yeah,
starts
it's just,
revolution. This is
yeah,
when the quality of life reaches a point where people go, "No, I can't go there. And then if it gets deeper, they're ready to even risk their lives for changing it.
Mm. So I
That's
think,
uh, that's coming.
yeah, I think I think the Democrats that, were trying to orchestrate some, major change in the composition of the
The woke
electorate,
crusade.
yeah, it backfired on them,
It
and
did.
it's so I'm seeing anger that's starting to build up in New York, even within the,
Yeah.
the hardcore, you know,
It's the same in LA.
Democrat.
Same in LA. My sources in LA, that's where I came from. And I'm getting the same, people on the blue side of things are also getting fed up. People got on the blue side in Seattle got fed up with Chaz Chop. That whole like these people literally declared that part of Capitol Hill where I used to live as an independent state.
Yeah,
Usually you go to civil war for that.
yeah,
And it was a farce and a joke and people died and it was just terrible. Thank God I wasn't in Capitol Hill. I would have been just blocks away from that. But it was a sign, and it's the same with the green movement. Me, I've been involved with climate change for over a century. Well, not that. It feels like a century, but it's half a century. And I know from my study of this that it is definitely coming, but these people are a threat. These idiots that are running it, who are turning it into a cult. I'm their worst enemy as far as that. I will always challenge them. And the strange thing, I write about this, but a new development is I hold, I have trust that the deniers are going to be the people that come around. But these woke people, they're just doing it for some kind of virtue signaling. They don't give a damn about the climate. In fact, a lot of people that are financing all that. I mean, this is what Michael Moore exposed in his Planet of the Humans, a completely constantly suppressed on YouTube movie that everybody could see because it exposes the whole uh, ridiculousness of this green current of evolution of green activism. And it is there are definitely a lot of people who are mainly bankrolling a lot of that, and Sierra and all club and all that are it's just to make a buck out of corporate. They're just using another thing to make money, and they really don't believe in it, and they don't there but some people honestly don't believe in it, and other people who are far more uh, creepy to me are the people who pretend to believe into it, but they're really, I mean, this whole thing about carbon footprints, it is so dumb. A bunch of politicians decided that if, with no knowledge of what's really going on in the climate, that if we can just cut emissions by 30% by 2030, that's why they're all getting excited. I'm afraid and that's why they want to cut 30% out of the farms. It's this idea of lowering your carbon footprint. First off, we have put so much carbon in the system, they don't know the basic function of, all this hot air that's coming out of me tonight will not have an impact on the climate until 10 years from now. You won't see it until all of this hot air that I'm putting out. And so we have already baked into the system for the next coming few centuries 130-foot rise in the oceans. It's already in. You can magically ding your wand and all make carbon zero, but the human race has got to find a way to adapt to a millennium of changes that are already set in motion by what we've done, and most of it just since the 1980s. It's 2/3 of it. God knows what the percentage is now. So, and the other thing too is if you destroy all your industries to lower your carbon footprint, you will not have any means to change anything. You might want to, I mean, some of the greenies that are running the SPD party's chancellorship in Germany off the rails. Robert Habeck and Annalena Baerbock, who she's into total change. When she was once asked, she has a mathematical problem. She was once asked, would you like to see Putin change 180 degrees? And she says, oh, no, no, that's not enough. I want him to change completely. I want him to change 360 degrees, which means for the mathematically challenged like me, they're listening. That means you've just gone full circle, Mr. Putin, and you've returned to exactly who you are right now. 180 is a change. A 360 is you coming right back to where you are now. So her mind's going in circles. She's the foreign minister of Germany, this idiot. And she even openly once says, I don't care if the people that voted for us don't want us to go to war and fund Ukraine. I don't care. I'm not doing it for them. We're going to do it anyway. That's the lack of real democracy development in Europe talking. Democracy really hasn't, it's Alexander Mercouris of the Duran actually who woke me up to this. And I strongly recommend all of you check the Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou is one of the core best people. Those two Greeks get things that whole diplomatic corps of countries just can't seem to figure out. And, and they're rather entertaining, especially when Alexander Mercouris is kind of blown away by something. He starts sounding like a Monty Python character. He's going to Skullcud. It's like, and it's like, because he's very, I love his accent. I mean, he's born in Athens of the Alexander of Melinda Mercoury's family, famous Greek actress, and on a Sunday, a Monday, a Tuesday, and he looks kind of like her in a way. And and so anyway, he's very British. Might I say that if we could, and your Abrams tanks, and and he has this funny way of shifting and has this interesting smile, and he's kind of eccentric, but he's brilliant. He's brilliant. And I strongly recommend you go to YouTube and type in the Duran, like Duran Duran, and check them out. They're some of the best sources I have. And Mercouris, he's a source of mine since 2012. Um, so anyway, let's see. I think I'm winding down.
Okay. So I just want to tell the audience, okay, and I said this earlier, make sure you click the link. It's in the description of this video and all the videos that I've done with John, and they'll take you to his website so you can sign up for his periodical and do the readings that he has. If you want to just explain just real quick
Yes.
what a reading is for anyone that hasn't done a reading with you.
Yeah, there's a thing at the top of my website, and it's always there, and it says get a Hogue reading, a John Hogue reading, and you just click on the email.
Hey,
And what that'll
John,
do
I
is,
think I lost you.
yeah, and what that will do is just put Hogue reading as your subject line. You don't have to
You still
say
there, John?
unless you want to, and say hello. That's also fine. But if you just want to get it done, and what I'll see is because I get hundreds of emails, I keep my system wide open, and unfortunately, it gives me a lot of crap, but it also gives me stuff that that might get censored by my own system if I had a harder system. So that's just part of my job. So find your email. If you put Hogue reading, I'll see it right away. And then I'll write back to you. And what I'll give you is what the reading is. It can be about 90 minutes, but sometimes because it's the end of my day when I do it, if the reading needs more time, we do it until it's done. And so that's also sometimes happens. And it starts with astrology as kind of your Kelly Blue Book of your car. How you astrologically tick through your birth sign, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and how the soul driver can use this car, the body mind. And then we go into a deeper tarot reading, the tarot cross reading, and then there'll be a lot of things. What I'll often do is because I read people like I read the world. The world tells me its story, and that's when this oracular thing starts kicking into gear. And since coming back to readings after a 26-year hiatus, back in 2018, I find that I just say, well, tell me your story, tell me the things that what's coming up. Even if you say, well, I don't really know what I want to talk about in the reading. I said, well, what are you feeling right now? And I open that triggers this thing. And then it's like we start going down places where, oh, well, this is something happening here. And and then we do a deeper reading of the tarot reading of the Celtic cross that sometimes if I feel a card in the cross needs more, it's telling me there's more here that we have to unveil. I'll pull that card out and start a different Celtic cross. Now, sometimes I will do few of them until it feels like, and we'll both feel it's like, oh, now we're getting there. This is what the hidden thing that needs to express itself for our enlightenment. And and so it's lots of fun. I mean, it's the same energy that I'm pouring out just for you, that I'm
Hmm.
doing for all of you. And so, I mean, Paul's done it. He can tell you about it. And yeah, so it's just go there and it'll tell you how you can pay me on PayPal and if you don't like PayPal, you can pay me through a snail mail, no problem. And uh, I keep the price much lower than a public figure, famous person usually does because I don't, rich people have enough readers to help them. I want to help more people, but it still has to be, it's not like $500 for sure, but it's around 150. So, but it's hours and it's a lot of work and a lot of pouring out. And lately, everybody is just like, we have a journey and it's like, well, kind of like the journey we had now, but it's different. It's more one-on-one. And I certainly, the way I do medium work in any state of doing it for the world or for people is that I was initiated by Osho, my master, my teacher, to in the art of being completely out of control in the moment, just being here now, waiting, and things happen. And so it's an open medium that's conscious, not unfortunately like Donald, who doesn't know he's a medium. He just thinks he has common sense. But some people use common sense in funny ways. Like for most of history, common sense was that the moon rotated around a motionless Earth, because that's what we saw. And the Earth must have been flat, but a little disc-like, because sailboats used to kind of look like they were sinking over the horizon. So they reasoned in their common sense, oh, well, it's not a flat Earth, but it's like a disc. Common sense got it wrong completely.
Hmm.
So, um, so common sense should also be carefully watched. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's just being down to earth, but sometimes it really doesn't work. Like this was not a boom. This was a bubble, Mr. Trump. And
Right.
so that was a growing bubble that was popping, not a growing economy. And yeah, so yeah, come in and check it out, and also check out my Hogue Prophecy report. Like every opening of the year, I do a book size, like this thing that I'm finishing is about 41,000 words and 16 articles. And but usually what I do, so that I usually deliver that in this period of time of the year because a lot of people are interested in that. And then after this, I do maybe 2 to 3 articles, sometimes twice a month, but sometimes all together in 1 month, depending on my many other projects that I'm having to do and that I'm involved in. And so anyway, you go into that and you can have a doorway into alternative media through me as a aperture, and also see my unusual prophetic takes on things of the world. And so I hope you join me. This whole work wouldn't be able to happen if it wasn't for people who contributed, for one thing, that for a whole year subscription, $60 for all the articles for the year. And they're illustrated, by the way, and they're sent to you on an email so that none of the censorship of high tech can happen. So you get this very beautiful PDF file. And you can also use an Adobe Liquid if you want to read it on your phone. Just use Adobe Liquid, get the free download, and it won't be this little print that you're trying to move around on your cell phone. So you can read it on your cell phone if you do that. But that's all you have to do is go to get Adobe Liquid, and then you'll be able to read me in any font that is easy for you to read and formatting. And so yeah, there's those two things, and so uh, hope to see more of you and commune with
So,
you.
so everyone, make sure you click the link in this video and all the videos I've done with John, so you can help him out. Just click that link in the description. It'll take you right to his website, and you can start to sign up for those periodicals and the readings. So, John, thank you for coming on to the show and giving us some insight on what's going on with current events and what to look out for. And you know how we end the show. You wave goodbye to everybody, and then we'll close
I'll
it down.
say bye bye in Russian. It's really cute. Poka poka.
Polka polka.
Poka poka poka. Well, actually, they say your accent's wrong. Poka poka. It's poka poka.
Okay. All right. All right. Let me close it down here.